You've probably heard the story. A sinister doctor builds a 3-story murder castle in Chicago, right as the 1893 World's Fair brings millions of visitors to the city. Inside are trapdoors, secret passages, soundproof rooms, gas chambers, a basement crematorium, chutes for dropping bodies. He lures fairgoers, especially young women, into his hotel of horrors and murders, as many as 200 of them. It's one of the most famous true crime stories in American history. And here's the thing I have to tell you up front. A huge amount of that is not true. The 200 victims, the elaborate torture hotel packed with World's Fair tourists, much of it is myth, built up over a century by sensational newspapers, a pulp book, and later, Hollywood. But before you click away thinking the story's been debunked into nothing, stick with me. Because the real H.H. Holmes was absolutely a murderer, a cold, calculating con man who killed people who trusted him, including children, for money. And the true story, stripped of the legend, is in some ways more disturbing than the myth. So let's separate fact from fiction carefully and tell you what actually happened. Start with the man. His real name wasn't Holmes at all. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett on May 16, 1861, in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. By every account, he was intelligent, charming, and articulate, and, from a young age, a manipulator. He was bright enough to get into medical school, earning a degree from the University of Michigan in the early 1880s. And it was around there that he found his real calling, not medicine, but fraud. One of his early schemes reportedly involved stealing cadavers from the medical school, disfiguring them, and using them to fake deaths and collect on life insurance policies. That's the key to understanding everything he did later. From the very beginning, Herman Mudgett saw human bodies as a way to make money. He eventually reinvented himself with a new name, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, and around 1886 he landed in Chicago, in a neighborhood on the south side called Englewood. He took a job at a drugstore there. The owner conveniently disappeared, and Holmes took over the business. And then, on the corner of 63rd and Wallace Streets, he began building the structure that would make him a legend. So let's talk about what that building actually was, because this is where myth and reality split hard. It was a large 3-story mixed-use building. The ground floor had storefronts, including his drugstore. The upper floors had apartments and rooms he rented out. That part is real. Here's another part that's genuinely real and genuinely strange. During construction, Holmes repeatedly hired and fired different builders and work crews. The common explanation, and it's a reasonable one, is that by constantly swapping out workers, no single builder ever understood the full layout of the place. He may also have been doing it to avoid paying them. Either way, the result was an oddly built, confusing structure, and only Holmes knew its quirks. But the gas chambers, the body chutes, the basement crematorium, and the torture dungeon, that's where the legend takes over. After Holmes was arrested, Chicago's newspapers, in the heyday of what we now call yellow journalism, competed to print the most lurid possible version of the story. They turned an ordinary laundry chute into a corpse disposal system. They described elaborate kill rooms that investigators never actually documented, and the claim that the building operated as a thriving hotel that swallowed up 200 World's Fair tourists. The 3rd floor, the supposed hotel, was reportedly never even finished, furnished, or open to the public. As for that famous number, up to 200 victims, historians have traced it back to a single throwaway line in a pulp crime book from 1940. One sentence, in one sensational paperback, that everyone has been repeating ever since. So how many people did H. Holmes actually kill? When historians look hard at the evidence, the number they can support with real confidence is around 9. Not 200. Around 9. And I want to be clear. 9 murders still makes him a serial killer, a monster. But it matters that we tell the truth, because the real victims deserve to be more than props in a ghost story. So, who were they? Several of them were people in Holmes's own orbit, people who trusted him, worked for him, or were romantically involved with him, and who then simply vanished. There was Julia Connor, a married woman who became involved with Holmes, and her young daughter Pearl. They disappeared around Christmas of 1891. There was Emmeline Sigran, a young woman who worked for him, and there were 2 sisters, Minnie and Anna Williams, connected to him in the early 1890s, who were never seen again. Holmes had a pattern. He got close to people. He stood to gain from their deaths: money, property, the silencing of someone who knew too much about his frauds. And then they were gone. This wasn't a predator randomly snatching strangers off the street at a fair. It was something colder and more personal. He murdered people who let him into their lives. But the crime that actually brought him down, the one he was tried and executed for, was the one that involved children. And this is the part of the story that's fully documented and genuinely heartbreaking. By 1894, Holmes had a partner in crime, a man named Benjamin Pitezel, a fellow swindler who had worked with him for years. The 2 of them cooked up an insurance scheme. The plan was for Pitezel to fake his own death, using a cadaver as a stand-in, so that Pitezel's wife could collect on a $10,000 life insurance policy, which they'd split. It was exactly the kind of fraud Holmes had been running his whole life. Except this time, Holmes didn't bother with a fake body. He simply murdered Benjamin Pitezel for real in Philadelphia, staged the scene, and collected the insurance money himself. And then it got worse. Pitezel's widow, not knowing her husband was actually dead, entrusted 3 of her children to Holmes, believing he was helping reunite the family. Their names were Alice, the eldest, around 15, and the 2 younger ones, Nellie and Howard. Holmes took those 3 children and traveled with them across the United States and into Canada, spinning lies to keep the mother and authorities at bay. And one by one, he murdered them. He killed the boy, Howard, in a rented house in Irvington, Indiana, in October of 1894, and he killed the 2 girls, Alice and Nellie, in Toronto, where he buried them in the cellar of a rented house. Now here's how the whole thing finally unraveled, and it's almost absurd. Holmes had been jailed briefly in an unrelated fraud matter, and while behind bars, he'd shared a cell with a Wild West outlaw named Marion Hedgepeth. Holmes, never able to stop scheming, actually told Hedgepeth about the insurance plot and promised him $500 for the name of a crooked lawyer who could help. Holmes pulled off the scheme and then stiffed Hedgepeth, never paying the promised cut. So Hedgepeth, furious at being cheated, told authorities what he knew. The man who finally pointed the finger at America's most infamous killer was a fellow criminal he'd been too cheap to pay off. That tip led to Holmes's arrest, and it put a Philadelphia detective named Frank Geyer on the trail of those 3 missing children, and Geyer is, to me, the real hero of this story. Through the second half of 1895, he traveled thousands of miles, retracing Holmes's movements city by city, hotel by hotel, carrying photographs of the kids. He had one crucial set of clues, letters the Pitezel children had written to their mother that Holmes, for reasons no one fully understands, had kept and never mailed. Geyer followed that trail relentlessly until it led him to a house in Toronto, where, in the cellar, he found the bodies of Alice and Nellie. He kept going, and in Indiana, he found the remains of little Howard. A detective's sheer persistence is the only reason those children were found at all. Holmes went on trial in Philadelphia in late 1895 for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel, and true to form, he turned even his confession into a performance. He confessed to 27 murders, a number that helped cement his legend. But it quickly fell apart. Several of the people he confessed to killing turned up perfectly alive. He told different versions to different audiences, at one point even claiming he was physically transforming into a devil. It was manipulation to the very end. In the courtroom, though, the facts were enough. He was convicted of one murder, Benjamin Pitezel's, and sentenced to death. On May 7, 1896, H. Holmes was hanged in Philadelphia about a week before his 35th birthday. And he had one last strange request. He asked to be buried in a coffin filled with concrete, set unusually deep in the ground, reportedly so that no one could ever dig up his body. For more than a century afterward, a rumor floated that Holmes had somehow cheated the gallows and escaped, maybe to South America. So, in 2017, his own descendants petitioned to have the grave opened, and when they did, they found exactly what the legend described: a body encased in concrete, buried deep, even with a concrete-filled dummy coffin placed above it. Using his teeth, forensic experts confirmed it. It was him. He hadn't escaped. H. Holmes died on that rope in 1896, just as the record said. So why does the myth, the 200 victims, the World's Fair, the Castle of Traps, why does it persist, even now that we know better? Part of it is that the truth is harder to package. A charming con man murdered people who trusted him, including 3 children, in a long-running insurance fraud, doesn't fit on a haunted house poster the way 200 tourists killed in a maze of death does. But I'd argue the real story is the one worth remembering, precisely because it's true. Herman Mudgett wasn't a supernatural boogeyman lurking in a fortress of horrors. He was something that actually exists in the world. A smiling, intelligent man who could look you in the eye, gain your trust, and kill you for what was in your wallet, or in your life insurance policy. If you remember anyone from this story, don't let it be the legend of the murder castle. Let it be Alice, Nellie, and Howard Pitezel, 3 children who trusted the wrong man, and the detective who refused to stop until he brought them home. Thank you for sitting with me here in the quiet dark. If you learned something, leave a like so the real story reaches more people, subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one.